Well, hello and welcome to week 3 in our winter 2022 life group session together. We are journeying through the book of Ecclesiastes as we learn together what it looks like to live life backward. We've been talking about this theme that in the reality of life is this, that we are all going to die, that we have a moment yet undetermined when we will go into eternity. And the question is, how do we look at that moment, not as something that discourages us, not as something that we try to fight against, but that's something that we embrace and understand and live life differently in light of it. Embracing our mortality and embracing our brief time on this earth, it actually enables us, it frees us up to live our best life for God's glory as long as He gives us breath. Breath, smoke, vapor. Remember that word? Hevel. Much of life is hevel. It's this idea that it is elusive, that life is sometimes fleeting, that life is sometimes a paradox, something that's hard to grasp and truly understand. But if we recognize this and embrace the fact that God frees us up to enjoy our day-to-day, we could live well in light of the end. The first section in chapter 1, verses 1 through 11, talked about that big theme of death. And then last week, we went into those various areas in our life where we often look for meaning and find them to be hevel. Well, places like our career, places like pleasure, places like possessions and achievements, even wisdom and knowledge itself. In the end, they do not fully satisfy. So embrace the day-to-day. Enjoy it, recognizing God gives us just fleeting moments in this world to appreciate His good gifts. And today we're going to chapter 3. We're talking about this theme of doing time. That was the title of the sermon on Sunday. I've taken some of these titles from the book by David Gibson, Living Life Backward. That's where I've gotten the theme name for our series together. And his chapter on chapter 3 of Ecclesiastes is called Doing Time. I like that. It's this idea of recognizing the reality of the seasons of life that we are in, embracing and understanding seasons, and looking to live to God's glory the best we can in the midst of it. That's what we talked about on Sunday. I want to remind you, our life groups are based off of our Sunday messages. So get into the Word with us as you worship with us in person or online. The life groups will mean a lot more if they do. So on Sunday, we talked about several themes here, but the first I want to do is read the first 8 verses here of this chapter, of this beautiful poem about the seasons of life. It says this: "There's an occasion for everything, and a time for every activity under heaven. A time to give birth and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to throw stones. A time to gather stones. A time to embrace. A time to avoid embracing. A time to search and a time to count as lost. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to sow. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace." Beautiful poetry here at the beginning of chapter 3. In fact, you don't have to be a Christian to embrace the reality and the truth that this poem is seeking to echo. In fact, we even see in popular culture the use of several of the images and verses here in Ecclesiastes to talk about life. Perhaps some of you, as you read this section, you're thinking of that song by the Byrds in 1965 of "There is a season," right? Turn, 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 right? That ends with that idea of war and a time for peace. Will we get it? Remember, we talked about that a little bit on Sunday, that you could be a person not in a relationship with God and recognize the times of the world that we live in. And this theme here is trying to set for us the reality, the truth, that we are time-bound, we are mortal and time-bound, and we need to respond appropriately to the seasons of life as they come. There is a time here for birth and a time to die. That recognizing we are time-bound creatures enables us to respond appropriately to the seasons of life as they come, to celebrate new life, to mourn at death, Remember, it says as well, there is a time to mourn and a time to dance. There's a time to tear down, a time to build, a time to speak, a time to be silent. In other words, the world in which we live, bound by time, will bring into our daily experiences various seasons of response. And the wise person, remember, Ecclesiastes is all about wisdom, it's wisdom literature, knows how to respond appropriately for the season that they are in. Many of us live lives very disappointed or never satisfied because we're always looking for the next season to come. And when that season finally does, we don't even enjoy it fully because it doesn't even live up to what we hoped would be found at that time. It enables us to live this hamster wheel approach to life without ever truly embracing and understanding the seasons that God has placed us in. God, in this text here, is reminding us, respond appropriately to the season of life that you are in. Some of you are in a season of mourning right now. There's been loss, whatever it might be, physical, emotional, relational. Don't push too fast past that season. Embrace whatever it is and seek to live well in the midst of it. If there's a season of great joy, embrace it. And how about what we see in the life of other people? When you see other people in a season that you wish you were in, celebrate that. Celebrate what God is doing in the life of other people. There is nothing that demonstrates humility and true satisfaction in God than our ability to celebrate the good things happening in the lives of others. If you see, however, others that are struggling, reach out. Because you might be in a season of abundance or laughter or joy, maybe in that moment, God calls you to reach out to that person who's in a season of loss or mourning, or a season where things seem to be being torn down. We could all think in our own life of people that have been there for us in moments like that. So, we are time-bound creatures. Respond appropriately to the seasons of life as you experience it, and ask God to help you love and serve others as they go through their various seasons. But another point we talked about on Sunday is that though we are mortal, though we are time-bound, that as image bearers of God, we long for eternity. This is that line that it says in verse 11 and 12. He has made everything appropriate in its time. He has also put eternity in their hearts. But no one can discover the work God has done from beginning to end. I know there's nothing better for them than to rejoice and to enjoy the good life. We long for eternity. Eternity has been placed in our hearts. What does he mean here? He's saying, yes, as we embrace the seasons of life, as we know the highs and the lows, the joys and the struggles, and we seek to live well in the midst of it, we know instinctively in our heart, as those created in the image of God, that there is more. We long for eternity. Think of it. Think of the most wonderful, joyful experience you could have with maybe your child or grandchild. You experience it for maybe hours, or maybe it's a day. Perhaps it's a great vacation that you take with those closest to you. Whatever it might be, you recognize this is the way it would be lovely to live day in and day out forever. We long for eternity. We long for everything to be put right, for there to be good. And this scripture reminds us that this is what makes us unique, separate from the animals, if you will. Though we die like they do, it says that at the end of this chapter, we have eternity to look forward to in our hearts. There's a longing, there is a hope, there is a desire for more. When you long for more of the good times, may it remind you of the ultimate experience that awaits all of us, eternity with God, if you know him through his son, Jesus. This is where we see this gospel truth, little kernel here in this section. How can those who yearn for eternity actually embrace and experience it? It's to put their trust and their faith in the eternal one who came into time on our behalf. You hanging with me on that? We, though time-bound, long for eternity. It's part of what God has put in our heart as humanity, as his image bearers in this world, longing for more. And we know as followers of Jesus, the eternal one has put on flesh and bones and lived in time and space so that our yearning for more could be ultimately fulfilled in him. Are you looking to Jesus today for your hope for eternity? Are you looking for him today for your ultimate joy? So, we're mortal and time bound. We need to accept the seasons of life as we experience them. We are, though mortal and time bound, we long for eternity. It's something God has placed in our hearts. Will we trust in Jesus, the personification of this eternal hope? And then thirdly, in the text, we talked about this, that our God is timeless. And that this frees us up to do several things: to accept the season we are in, to rejoice in the season we are in, and to ponder deeply the season we are in. Rejoicing and accepting and pondering the season we are in. Why? Because our God is timeless. Look at what it says once again, verse 11. He has made everything appropriate in its time. He puts eternity in our hearts, but no one can discover the work God has done from beginning to end. He knows it from beginning to end. Verse 14, I know that everything God does will last forever. There is no adding or taking. God works so that people will be in awe of him. And God seeks justice for the persecuted. So much in these verses here. I love the wisdom literature. Just gives us the opportunity to deeply reflect. I mean, there's like 3 or 4 messages right in here. But I want you to see this. The comfort that comes from knowing our God is timeless. He says, we know that everything God does will last forever. There's no adding or taking away from it. In other words, God is not bound by time like we are. And he knows from beginning to end how the story will unfold. Now, this does not mean that he is there as some great puppeteer controlling us along the way. This is the great challenge, right, we have with the idea of God's sovereignty and our free will. They're on either side of the same coin. We can't look at one and think that it is not controlled by or having influence by the other. That God, in some amazing way, works within our free choices to fulfill his sovereign will, and it cannot change. Now, this is not an excuse for us to not be obedient to whatever we're called to do. This is not an excuse for us to say, well, God's got it in control. I don't need to use these gifts or serve this way or love or sacrifice. God will work it out in the end. No. The life of a follower of Jesus is an invitation to trust that he knows beginning to end, and he invites us day in, day out to be a part of what is good. God is timeless, so we get to accept it. As well, we see here in the text that whatever is has always been, and whatever will be already is. And God works this way so that people might be in awe of him. What? We get to submit to him in awe and reverence and fear. Fearing God and keeping his commandments at the end of this book. It's a summary, a reminder of how to live in this world. That we get to live in awe of him. You get to live in worship of him. Isn't this what worship should be about? Giving awe, reverence, respect, responding to what God has revealed, and offering back of ourselves to him, knowing that he is the God who has it all in control in his hand. Do you believe him? This is a God that's worthy of worship. We don't come to worship a God that we can completely understand and figure out. We don't come to worship a God because we know exactly what he's doing and how he's doing it. No. We worship the sovereign God who's in control of it all. And when we recognize our time-bound condition and his timeless position, it should drive us to worship, to be in awe of him. We talked about as well, rejoicing and enjoying everything in life. It talks about it in this text as well. I know that everything God does will last forever. It talks about as well that then it is better for them to enjoy the good life. That enjoying life as a gift from the timeless God is our responsibility. Accepting as well the difficult times, mourning, death, injustice as we see it in the world, for sure. Rejoicing accepting and pondering how God might work things out. Because remember as well, in the end, the great comfort of this is that God seeks justice for the persecuted. That in the end, the things in this world that are unjust, the things in our lives that we experience that are unfair and wrong, the injustices we see in the world around us, that God is not mocked, and that God in the end, he seeks justice. That frees us up to accept when we see struggle and we see no answer from those that should be giving, knowing that God is the one who will bring it about. And we get to now, in time and space, echo that justice that is to come. So be a person of justice today. Accept it where God has placed you in these seasons of life. Gibson in his book summarizes this section this way. I love it. We get to trust the timeless God with all the times of our lives. That's the summary of this text. Trust the timeless God with all the times of your life. Accept, rejoice, ponder the season you are in. Yearn for eternity. But ultimately, trust the timeless God with the times of our lives. Whatever season you're going in, season of joy or struggle, a season of a high or a low, know God has a purpose in it. And God's working it out. And the timeless God who sees the beginning to the end will make sure justice prevails. So, to every season, turn, turn, turn. And for the follower of God, we get to yearn for eternity and trust him in the midst of them.